Hey guys, this is Shannon Lynch, your local realtor here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks for joining me again. Today my guest is Robert Grooms. He's a GC and owner of Queen Boss Construction. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's been a little while.
It has been a little while. So let's start off, if you don't mind. You and I met through the Real Estate Investors Association's.
Yes.
Goodness.
It's been a while.
Yeah, years and years and years
ago. Yeah.
And we were both investors at that point.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how you got involved in real estate and how you went from investor to general contractor, if you may.
Yeah. So I started in real estate, just curious, wanting to buy one or two rental properties and really just create some additional income.
Well, it's seductive, isn't it?
It's once you have one, it's very seductive. But got into the process and bought a couple rentals, and then started learning about the creative ways to buy and sell real estate.
Yeah.
We did that for a little while. And then after a couple years, unfortunately, that was around the time of the recession.
The
that
market,
was back
yeah,
in
when the market-
2010. Yeah.
Well, you figured 2007, we finished our last rehab.
Yeah.
Because our hard money lender saw the writing on the wall and he was like, finish up the project,
Yeah.
and so we did. And then from like 2008 to 2010 was just
Pretty rough.
A massacre.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had started doing projects, and I basically moved away from doing my own investments to getting out of the business for a while. And
Yeah.
I moved over to working for someone and worked for a general contractor, basically running commercial projects for about 5.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I got the itch to get back out on my own. And that's about 3.5, 4 years ago now. Got my license, got involved, and we've been working for homeowners, doing new construction, a little bit of remodel, major renovations and additions over the last couple years.
How do you choose your contractors and what should you look for when you're vetting them?
So as a contractor, I think for me it's going through, and I a lot of times find contractors from my current subs.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've got an electrician that I've worked with and I'm looking for a plumber, or I'm looking for an HVAC company, a lot of times I'll go to them and ask them if there's anybody they've worked with, because typically your quality of work, you usually associate yourself with people who kind of operate the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Another way I've actually started looking lately is social media. It's surprising how many companies are out here, and it's another form of marketing, and it allows me to see some of the work you've done.
That's a valid point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start the process, but still go through the normal vetting a lot of times.
I think
now.
that's smart. There's a lot you can learn on Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook and
Yeah.
Instagram.
Yeah.
You can see a lot of what people do, and then that kind of lets you know where they're working, and then you have to kind of still do the groundwork on the back end of just making sure they're licensed, if they're require a license, and making sure they're insured, so that when you start using them, everything's in order.
Whew, you really just touched upon something, though. I think people don't realize how much social media has an impact. And if you are putting your business out there, you're putting your stuff out there, especially subcontractors who generally are, independent contractors
Yep.
working for themselves,
Yep.
should really keep in mind not just what they're putting out there as far as their projects, but what they're putting out there personally.
Yeah, so
You know what I mean? I
I know
hate
exactly
to
what
say
you
it,
mean.
but it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, on the one hand, you can say, yes, social media, it's social media. Like you can
Yeah.
put whatever you want out there. It's a free country, sure.
Yeah.
But, when you're talking about potential employers, hiring you,
yeah.
you might want to be careful what you're putting out there for the world to see.
So that's for sure. I mean, you operate as somebody's project manager and you have your own profile, but you still got to be conscious of what you say and how, we've all got our own opinions.
For sure.
And so
there's a time and a place.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and when you're supposed to be the face of a company, you kind of, you bring the company along with you one way or the other, good
Absolutely.
or bad.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there good projects and bad projects? And how do you decide what's a project that you might want to work on and what's a project that you might want to walk away from?
Yeah. So there's definitely good projects and there's bad projects. One of the things I've learned over time is that you've got to really look at a project. So if the homeowner has a tight budget, you've got to make sure that what they want to do is what you can actually achieve.
Is realistic.
Yeah. A lot of times homeowners go into projects and the numbers don't add up. And if you have talked to them and it just doesn't make sense, you sometimes just got to walk away from the job.
There's a pretty big disconnect there, I think.
There's a very big disconnect. There's a lot of HGTV that
oh goodness, isn't there though?
Yeah,
I know. Like, I mean, that's the one thing I'll say about our podcast is we definitely keep it real.
Well,
I mean, there's, I think you're right. A lot of people watch these shows and they go, oh, this is great and we can do that. And then they stand in their space and they look around and they go, oh yeah, we can move this wall and we can open this up and we can do that. But they don't necessarily know or understand all of the logistics.
The logistics and the cost,
and
right?
The
cost is the
and
part
the
that
time.
they miss. Yeah. And I tell you it's going to be a 45-day project and you hear that, but once we start and we're in your house for 45 days, there's a certain disruption. Construction is a messy thing. And I have to remind homeowners of that all the time. Whenever we're doing something where the homeowner's going to stay in the property,
Good night.
We've got a kitchen remodel we're getting ready to do, and the homeowners are going to live in the space, and
they're cooking on their microwave and their hot plate in the bathroom because that's all you can do because you can't be in the kitchen.
Yeah, we're going to completely gut the kitchen.
Right.
We're opening
There's
up a couple walls.
Dust.
There's going to be dust.
Everywhere.
It's going to be a mess. And
everywhere.
So,
I don't care how much you plastic off the space.
No.
That stuff still gets everywhere.
Yeah, and so it's always a struggle getting you to understand before you get started. Once the walls start coming down and the dust starts flying, you get it pretty quickly, right? You get it pretty quickly. But
you have such a nice, calm demeanor that I could, and you're good at communicating, so I could see you being the calm and the voice of the storm.
I try to be.
Well, you have to be.
Yeah.
You have to be. You're the captain leading that ship. So, they're going to feed off of your energy.
Yeah.
And you have to be the one to say, and I think a lot of what you do really does come down to communication and preparing the homeowners.
Communication is huge in the business. There's one thing, that's one of the things customers always tell me is, if nothing else, just communicate. Let me know what's happening, be it good or be it bad.
Oof.
Keep me in the loop. Don't disappear. I can't tell you how many projects we've come behind another contractor, and they'll go weeks in the process where the homeowner can't get in touch with them, and no one's been on site. And
you're living in a construction site.
You're living in it, or
you're home.
Well, a lot of times homeowners will relocate, so they've got that additional expense because they're now renting another space, and they were told it was going to be a 4.5 to 6 month process, and they're 3 months in, and they can't see light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, so it's a challenge. Yeah, but communication is huge. You got to just stay in front of it. Like I said, it's not always good. But I'd rather tell you what's happening and make sure we're both on the same page.
Do we want to talk about the difference between working with investors versus working with homeowners? Do we? Should we? I think we should.
Yeah, that's fine. It's it's good that I was an investor or that I am an investor.
You understand it.
Yeah,
because you've been there.
Yeah, you know how to wear that hat, and you know what the investor is going through, and there's a lot of unforeseen when you're in a project that you can't prepare for, and you budget for everything you think.
And you put in your 10% overage, and you hope that's going to be enough for the oops and the surprises that you don't expect, for sure.
Yeah. No, but when you're dealing with homeowners, they typically are a little more reserved and not as educated as an investor is in the process. Mm-hmm. A seasoned investor who's been doing it and they've done 4 or 5 projects, they're going to know a little bit more about the process and what timelines should be.
Absolutely.
But a lot of times when dealing with investors, the type of funding they have can be an issue because you're dealing with hard money loans, private lenders where they want to see certain milestones.
Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with draws.
You're dealing with draws. Mm-hmm. And it's not a bad thing, but as a contractor, if you're dealing with draws, it depends on whether you've got upfront funds or you're more or less financing the project for the investor because you're paid upon completion of work.
Sure, for sure.
And so that that puts you in a little bit of a situation where you've got to be careful to make sure that your investor is managing their money. And sometimes you've got to find out who they've worked with and why they're not working with them anymore, because, when there's a frayed relationship, there's usually a little bit on both ends. And so you just want to know what you're walking into with investors.
So there's got to be a certain amount of trust on both sides.
Absolutely.
There.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, working with investors has its own challenges. We'll say it that way.
Well, we want everything for the least amount of money as possible.
Right.
We want it done yesterday.
Right.
We want it done well.
Well, because we've got
a
a system, we've got a machine that tells us this should account for this much, and that may not always be the case, and costs adjust, and it's a working thing. It's a working piece of art, shall we say? For
sure. And so if you were doing an addition, let's just kind of go through sort of the steps, like framing, roofing,
sure,
HVAC. What happens where and when in the process, and the inspections and that sort of thing.
So going back to the inspections, so after your footing and foundation inspections, typically then you start to build out of your actual framing. So you get your framing completed. That just depends on the scope and the scale of the job. It can be anywhere from a couple weeks to, maybe a little bit longer than that. But once your framing is complete, you're going to have your subs once it's dried in, as we call it, where basically the roof is on. Sometimes you'll have the roof shingles on, sometimes you won't. But you have your subcontractors come in. So that's your plumber, that's your electrician, and your mechanical contractor. And they'll come in and do their rough work, which is basically the stuff you never see as a homeowner. That's running your plumbing lines through the walls. That's running all your duct work under the underground or any attic, whichever way you're going to go. And that's running all your electrical lines and putting your boxes in the walls. Upon completion of that, that's when you get your inspection. So your 3 trades will usually do their inspections. They'll come out, do the rough plumbing, rough electrical, and rough mechanical. Once they finish those, hopefully they can get through it on the first pass. But, inspectors are there to make sure everything's done right. So sometimes it takes you 1 or 2 passes.
For sure.
Then you'll have your framing inspection, where they'll come out, verify the sheathing is tied to the house properly, your plywood is secured, and there's no deficiencies. If they want some additional strapping, or if you're using any kind of LVLs or anything like that, that they're married together correctly. Once you're done with that, then you go to your insulation, get your insulation in, whether you're using spray foam insulation, which is something we just started using on a couple projects.
Yeah.
Pretty cool experience. It really tightens the envelope. Yeah, it's a little more expensive up front, but the long term,
I think it's a good product.
Yeah, long term, it's definitely a better, warmer environment. But then once you're done with your insulation, it's really a race to the finish. That's when you start getting your drywall in, getting all your vanities, your trim work, everything that's got to be done to the interior, and then whatever you're doing, if you're doing brick or hardy siding on the exterior. And then once you're in that stage, pretty much the next time you start to see inspectors back is when you're ready for your final. So that's just about, at the end of the project, when you've got the final inspection for your plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and then your building inspection,
So your cabinets are going in, your electricians are coming back, they're putting in the lighting, fixtures. Because before they did everything in the walls. Now they're doing the things that you can see.
That you see,
your painters.
So your hardwood floors go in if you're using hardwood, your tile.
Your plumbing fixtures,
all your trim work, all that's done, So, I mean, that's the part the homeowners see. That's the part that is the touchy-feely, which is what they're more concerned with. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's so funny because every time we do a rehab, and this is the 4th one in a 12-month span, and every single one we've taken down to the studs. And I always think of it as like, I'm so weird. I think of it as like the guts of the house. And then when our plumbers come in or our electricians come in and they're running all the wires inside, it reminds me of, like, you think about, like, the body, right? And you've got, so I think of them as like the arteries of the house. They're the ones that are pumping all the blood through the house and do, like, that's the guts of the house in the walls. And so I really like seeing what kind of goes on in the walls.
Well,
I mean,
that's the big part.
People don't think about. There's so much that people don't think about. They walk into a house and they ooh and ah about, whatever the finishes are. But it's like, if you're doing new construction, you're doing addition, you have to decide when you walk into the room, where are you going to put the light switch? Is the light switch going to go here? Is the light switch going to go here?
Which way the door opens.
Which way the door
Yeah,
opens.
I mean, smallest things.
How many switches are you going to have?
Yeah.
Do you need one for the light, one for the ceiling fan, one for the, like it's all this minutia, all these little details that people just go into a house and take for granted.
You take for granted, yeah, because it's done, right? So, I mean, you expect everything to be where it's supposed to be, right? So, I mean, that's the luxury the homeowner or the investor should be able to, when you hire that general contractor, they should be able to put you at ease that they're going to help you to make those steps. And some of that you need to talk to the homeowner about, and you need to, during that staging, make sure that they're involved so they can say, oh, yeah, I want the door to swing this way, and I want our lights on this wall. So when I come in, I'm flipping the switch, and it works accordingly.
Well, and I think, too, a lot of times if you hire, Joe Handyman, Joe Handyman is not thinking about those things.
No.
You tell Joe Handyman you want to redo your bathroom. He's not going to have the presence of mind, I think, a lot of the times to say, all right, well, if we're moving this here, then we probably need to have your light switches here, or it's those details that I think a lot of times when you're dealing with a handyman, or you're dealing with, even if it's just one of the subcontractors or trades, that's where I think a GC brings additional value, because the GC is sort of the umbrella over everybody and should be looking at the project in its entirety and giving advice and solutions. I mean, I get it that the architect has already been there and they've kind of laid things out too, but isn't that also does that not fall under your umbrella to some extent?
That's a huge part. Yeah. I mean, you have to help. You're there to bring that vision to life, right? So, I mean, as a general contractor, your expertise is what they're paying for. Your experience and knowing, okay, timing, this has got to be done at this time, being able to sit down, walk them through, this is your allowance for tile. I highly recommend you go to these locations to select your tile, but you're welcome to go wherever. And if you double your budget, understand that that's a cost you have to take on. But you're there to help, to be kind of a guiding light, for lack of a better word, to bring it all together. Yeah, I mean, that's where you differ from some of the general carpenters or just handymen that are out here who, their vision is basically, this is a project, I'm going to do this piece, or I'm going to try and do it all, and I'm not going to pull any permits, and we'll hope for the best. Mm-hmm. I've got my money, I'm down the road, and I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, and I could see homeowners thinking along those lines too, because the markup with the GC is what, like 20 or 25%,
typically about
something
20,
to that.
Yeah, 20 to 22% typically. Yeah.
I mean, and listen, you don't work for free. You're managing a job, and you deserve to get paid for the job that you do and the value that you bring to the table.
Yeah.
I don't know that people always understand or appreciate that. I mean, it's the same thing with realtors, right? Right now, a lot of people feel like, well, I can FSBO, I can for sale by owner.
For sale by owner. Yeah.
And I think, sure, and you throw it out there and you think it's easy, but there's so many nuances that you may not have even thought about as far as showings and inspections and negotiations. And, there's so much more to it, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Unfortunately, on the real estate end, that opens you up to the savvy investor who is aware of that and will come in and unfortunately take advantage of you a lot of times if you're not really, astute on what you're trying to do. Because you're right, you see a lot of for sale by owner because everybody's trying to hold on to every penny. And I get that, but, in our space, you're talking about the people that live in that home, whether they're the current homeowners or if you're selling it, the new homeowners. And, there's a lot of responsibility and liability on the residential side that you open yourself up to if you don't, do the minimum, which is pull a permit. Even if you don't hire a general contractor, pull a permit, have somebody put second eyes on it.
What's the timeline for starting a project and getting it off the ground?
Great question. When it comes to the timeline, it really just depends on the project. But if we're doing any kind of addition or remodel, the biggest problem we have is setting the right expectation for the homeowners. Homeowners will come in and they have a vision and they're like, you know what, let's do an addition. And they don't realize that there's a 60 to 90 day period of time.
And why is that so long? What goes into that? What happens during those 60 to 90 days?
So your stages are, you've got an architect, which has got to come and give you a rendering or a layout of what you want to do. So let's say you're doing 1,000 square foot addition off the back of your home. He's got to come out, get his measurements, and he's got to work to basically get the property set up on CAD, which is what most of your architects and designers use today. Once they've got that, there's a lot of back and forth. That usually takes anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks with the homeowner. And it can go on longer if I bring you the rendering and you say, you know what, I want to change this and I want to change that.
Well, that never happens.
That never happens, except it happens every time, right? Yeah. So
because it sounded good in your head, and then you see it on
then
paper,
you start
and
to
you
see
go,
it. Yeah.
that didn't quite work out the way I thought it was going to.
And what happens there is they've got to vet everything, and you've got to get it right, because the structural engineer is the next phase if you're doing plans. And so they've got to take that rendering that the architect or designer provides, and they've got to say, okay, in order for us to be able to put this addition out here, we've got to have piers at these points under the house. The roof point load has got to be here. You're going to use rafters, if you're going to use trusses, if it's a 2-story. So they provide kind of the blueprint, and between the architect and the structural engineer, that could be 45 to 60 days. And then from there, you move over to going for the permits. And your permitting process is usually a couple weeks, working with the city, anywhere from 5 to 14 days typically. That's when you are pretty much ready to start building. But I mean, that process is anywhere from 45 to 90 days sometimes, and homeowners, they get that buzz and there's that
they're excited.
There's that rush of energy, and you're like let's get started.
Like they finally said, oh my gosh, and you pulled the trigger and they called you. And you're like, we're ready, we're gonna do it.
So you just gotta be able to set the right expectations up front.
What's the various inspections that are involved with a project, basically, from the beginning to the end?
So when it comes to inspections, first thing you're going to do is you're going to have your footing inspection, which is basically what your house is built on. You call out, they come out. Once you've dug out, 18 inches, 24 inches, just depending on what the structural engineer calls for. Then your next inspection is your foundation inspection. So that's your foundation walls, literally. Depending on the design of the property, your foundation walls will dictate whether it's 18, 24 inches in height, 3 feet, but that's your next inspection.
So they're looking to see so they're looking for width, they're looking for depth, they're looking for...
Good question. So when it comes
to... Because I know if the soil's not stable, then you're doing additional,
that's when you have to dig deeper. Yeah.
Right.
And so that's your footing inspection, because they'll come out, they take a pole, and they test to make sure there's a certain density to the soil. If they don't find it at that point, and, it could be anything that leads to it. If it's too sandy, here in the Carolinas, we've got that Carolina clay. And so that's usually pretty solid to where, you're going to dig a certain depth and you should be okay. We've definitely run across situations where we've had to dig, 3 feet to put a footer, just because the soil was not, very sound.
Right, stable enough.
Yeah. But then with your foundation walls, you're going to usually build them CMU block up and then put a brick skirt on the outside. So you've got to allow for that. And then from there, you start building out, doing your framing, and that's where your structural engineer comes into play, because he lays out, exactly what you're doing, whether it's floor trusses or stick building, roof trusses, depending on what's needed. So that's when you call in and you have your framing work completed. From there, you have your subcontractors, your electrician, your plumber, and your mechanical contractors. They'll come in, they do their rough work, and that's all the stuff you don't see as the homeowner or the investor, because that's behind the walls. So that's your electrical lines, your duct work for your ventilation, and your plumbing.
Right.
That's the stuff that honestly is the most important. It's not the sexiest part of the process, but
it's huge.
It's huge. You in the building process, that's why you have a permit, right? The inspector comes out after you've done that stage, and they do a rough inspection, and they verify that all of your mechanicals are up, to code, so that when you start to close the walls, you don't have any concerns. Once you get through your rough inspections, excuse me, then you have your insulation inspection. And when you do your insulation inspection, that's basically whether you're using spray foam, which is what we've started using on some of our bigger projects. It allows you to have a tighter envelope in the house, helps it to stay heated and cooled a lot better. Or you're using regular bat insulation.
And if you're using regular bat insulation, what are they looking for? Are they looking to see that you use the right R value?
Right R value, yeah, that's
in the
exactly
right locations?
Yeah, because you've got your crawl space if it's built on a crawl, or if it's on a slab, then there's no insulation underneath. But then you've got a certain R value for the walls, for the attic, and some people will spray in insulation in the attic instead of using bat. It just depends. But then they'll come out, do their insulation inspection. Once the insulation inspection is complete, then you start putting the house together, and that's the part the homeowners love to see. That's where your drywall comes in, your hardwood floors.
Well, it starts to take shape. You can sort of visualize it a little bit better.
Yeah, because until that point, it's all open, right? I mean, you can look from one end of the house to the other end, because all you're seeing is your studs, your 2x4s, 2x6s.
And it's so crazy, like your concept, your idea of how big the spaces are when you're looking at, have you found this? This happens to me every single one that we do, is when the walls are open and you can see everything versus once you get your drywall
Once you start
up,
hanging drywall,
it changes the whole feeling of the space.
Yeah, we just went through that on a project, 2-story addition we're doing, and the homeowner, because she could walk up and she could look from her master suite all the way to the other side of the house, and once we started hanging drywall, it becomes tighter.
It does.
And that 10 by 12 room now is truly
feels like 10 a 10 by 12.
Yeah, so you start to see it come together.
Yeah.
And then you put your vanities in, painting, tile work, all that goes in. And once you're done with all the finishes, then what you have is just your final inspections, which is your plumbing, mechanical, and electrical. And then finally your building inspection, once your grading on the exterior's done and your foundation vents are in and everything like that.
That's actually quite a few inspections.
It is.
And it should be. I mean, you're going to be living in this house. This house is there to shelter you and protect you, and it should be done right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, even on some of the smallest jobs, it makes sense to pull a permit because it's going to give you a second set of eyes. And that's for the homeowner as well as the contractor. And I know a lot of guys who don't, but I always recommend, unless it's truly a lipstick job and you're not making any major changes, it makes sense to pull that permit just to have that second set of eyes.
And I feel for the inspectors because, boy, that is a thankless job. You know what I mean? Like, they're there to make sure that everything's being done correctly.
Right.
And I understand that. I truly do. It can be very frustrating for the GC or for the investor because when you fail, now you got to get the guy back out there to fix it. Now you got to get the inspector back out there to approve it. And it causes delays, but that's not the inspector's fault, and I feel for them because I really do think it's a pretty thankless position, unless they say, okay, you guys got it right. Then you're like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're like, oh, come on, man.
More times than not, you got a little bit of that, oh, come on, man, somewhere in there. And and it's on the things you don't expect, It's on the things you can't see coming. But
For sure. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, are you currently taking on new clients? I guess I should start there.
Yeah, we are. We work in the Mecklenburg and surrounding areas. The best ways to get in touch with us are our website, queenbossconstruction.com. There's get a quote, or our office number, 704-323-5700. And then we're on Instagram, QC_construction, and you can find us on Facebook by just typing in the company's name, queenbossconstruction.com.
Cool. And you have a lot of pictures of your projects. People can kind of see what you guys have been up to.
Yeah, you can get a good feel. I am new to the world of social media, so I've only been doing that for about 6 months.
Come on in, the water's fine.
Yeah, but yeah, we've got a good bit of that out there. Yeah, you can definitely find it.
Awesome. That sounds great. I'll make sure
Absolutely.
that we put that on the bottom so that you guys can see it. And thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
This
I
was
greatly
great.
appreciate
It was so nice to catch up with you.
Yeah, yeah.
And although we both gotten a little bit, grayer,
It's been a while.
it's been a while. But it really was nice that we got a chance to reconnect after so many years.
Yeah,
which
no, I agree.
is awesome.
Well, I love that you're still having a lot of success in the business and that
Thank
you're
you.
back to investing.
Thank
So,
you. I know, right? Because I did. I mean, I started with the rehabs and then I jumped over to realtor, and the realtor world's been really good to me.
Yeah.
But I never lost the passion for wanting to do rehab. So,
Yeah.
and I think the next step for me is going to be some new builds. So we might have to talk.
Yeah, that's the next step for me too. I want to get back to new construction. I'm
So-
doing things for myself as well,
Yeah.
mixing it in there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what's in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.